Wait.
Oh, okay. Good morning and welcome to Northwest Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Tom Ott. I'm today's worship associate, and along with me, you'll hear our interim minister, the Reverend Kevin DeBeck, our choir director, Ken Hermanat, our acting director of religious education, Eva Leventer, and our accompanist, Alex Myers. Also, two members of the choir are here in person. Today's technical host is Susie Kinnan. You may notice some of these decorations behind me. It was beautiful holiday decorations. It was a nice surprise to come for the rehearsal yesterday and enter the church and think, wow, somebody decorated. I was wondering if it was Mark Babcock and Terry Radliff, and yes, they were, so I want to thank them. If you're a visitor here today and would like us to stay in touch with you, please fill out the visitor form you'll find in the chat box. The chat feature has been disabled except for chatting directly with the tech host. So if you are having problems with Zoom, you can use the chat function or the raise hand function in Zoom. You're encouraged to change your name to add pronouns on Zoom. My pronouns are he and the associated series. To change your name, click on the Participants button at the top of the Zoom window. Next, hover your mouse over your name in the participants list on the right side of the Zoom window and click on Rename. For our announcements, you can see our upcoming services, and after today's service, actually at 1 p.m., Reverend Kevin you can join for chat with the minister. And then the next 2 weeks, the next religious education is doing a fundraiser for Freedom House to buy holiday toys and also top-size donations. So you can select that for plate collection for Freedom House. Also, there are slots open for people to sign up to buy warm clothes. This is separate from the other adopt-a-size. Several upcoming services besides Sunday. The holiday tailgate special, December 19th from noon to 12 in our parking lot. If you came to the Halloween after parking lot party, that was a lot of fun, so this will probably be similar. There will be a fire pit, soups, treats, and so on. You can also pick up candies and cookies for the candlelight and Christmas Eve services. Yes, and the candlelight service again will be on Zoom, live streamed Sunday, December 19th at 6 p.m. If you would like to be a reader, let the worship arts team know. That's headed by Diana Kohler. And then Christmas Eve service is on, of course, Christmas Eve, Friday at 5 p.m. On Zoom. This will be lessons and carols. And then our regular December plate collections, the regular one is to the Michigan UU Social Justice Network that fosters works and dignity of people by promoting social distance. That's the 50-50 plate selection. And the other special plate is for the Southfield Emergency Needs Fund, which is taking the place of our usual adopt-a-size, since they want to rather just get baskets, or not baskets, but gift cards this year. So that's a special collection.
Good morning. My name is the Reverend Kevin DeBeck. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And before I do our chalice lighting this morning, in the wake of the events that occurred in Oxford this past week, we're doing a couple of things. Today, I'm going to offer a special prayer for those who were harmed and those who died right before we jump into joys and sorrows. On Zoom at 1 o'clock today, if you wish to have a space to discuss and process any feelings you may have about it, join us on Zoom starting at 1 o'clock. And then Monday evening at 7 o'clock, we're going to host something in the Memorial Garden. It's not necessarily a, what's the word? It's not necessarily a vigil. It's just a time to gather and to kind of be together to figure out what to do or what's next. So if you are so moved, there are a couple of times where we are offering you a safe space to do so. So in light of that, our chalice lighting this morning comes from the Reverend Dawn Fortune, and it's called The Night of Midwinter. And she says, "We light this chalice as a symbol of our free faith. We'd light this chalice to remember the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days. We'd light this chalice to mark the nights of midwinter. We'd light this chalice as we wait for the sun to return."
Our opening words are, "You are beloved, and you are welcome here," by the Reverend Joan Javier Duval. You are beloved, and you are welcome here. Whether tears have fallen from your eyes this past week, or gleeful laughter has spilled out of your smiling mouth, you are beloved, and you are welcome here. Whether you are feeling brave or brokenhearted, defiant or defeated, fearsome or fearful, you are beloved, and you are welcome here. Whether you have untold stories buried deep inside, or stories that have been forced beyond the edges of comfort, you are beloved, and you are welcome here. Whether you have made promises, broken promises, or are renewing your promises, you are beloved, and you are welcome here. Whatever is on your heart, however it is with your soul in this moment, you are beloved, and you are welcome here. In this space of welcome and acceptance, commitment and recommitment, of covenant and connection, let us worship together. Our first hymn is number 96, "I Cannot Think of Them as Dead."
Hello, this is Eva and Jameson and Yona, and we're going to light the Hanukkah Menorah. My family is Jewish, so we light a menorah every year. And then we're going to sing a Hanukkah song for you. So here is the first shamash candle. And we'll start by lighting one candle for each night of Hanukkah. And we have 8 nights of Hanukkah today is the 8th day. Come back to that one. And now we'd like to sing a song, Hanukkah song for you today. This ones won't light very well. Okay. Okay.
Well, closer.
Okay. Hanukkah, oh Hanukkah, come light the menorah. Let's have a party, we'll all dance a hora. Gather around the table, I'll give you a treat. Cradles to play with and latkes to eat. And while we are dancing, the candles are burning low. One for each night they will shed as they light to remind us of days long ago. One for each night they will shed as they light to remind us of days long ago. Thank you for listening.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I make my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life. Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to love.
My reading this morning that serves as text for my sermon are some information from the World Health Organization from from a month ago. And these are statistics about AIDS and HIV. AIDS has claimed over 36.3 million lives so far. There is no cure for an HIV infection. However, with increasing access to effective HIV prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and care, including for opportunistic infections, HIV infection has become a manageable chronic health condition, enabling people living with HIV to lead long and healthy lives. There were an estimated 37.7 million people living with HIV at the end of 2020, over 2/3 of whom are in the WHO African region. In 2020, 680,000 people died from HIV-related causes, and 1.5 million people acquired HIV. To reach the new proposed global 95-95-95 targets set by UN AIDS, we will have to redouble our efforts to avoid the worst-case scenario of 7.7 million HIV-related deaths over the next 10 years, increasing HIV infections due to HIV service disruptions during COVID-19, and the slowing public health response to HIV. This past Wednesday was World AIDS Day. It was established in 1988 to help raise awareness of the spread of AIDS and HIV. The decade of the 1980s was the decade in which AIDS became part of our lives and hasn't really left. Deaths due to AIDS have decreased since 2005 with the creation of better drugs and treatments, as I mentioned earlier. In fact, HIV now, instead of being a death sentence, has become a chronic illness that millions of people live with. According to the HIV.gov website, there's an estimated 1.2 million Americans and 37 million people worldwide who currently have HIV. The most recent news about HIV is mostly positive. Of course, that wasn't always the case. When I think about historical events, I tend to think of things that happened before my lifetime. If there was ever a time machine invented, I would be the first to jump on board because I would love to see what these events looked like firsthand. One of the offshoots of being a history lover is that I love watching documentaries even if I don't know who or what the subject of the documentary is. Maybe even especially so that way I can learn something new. Some years ago, I was tooling around on TV looking for something to watch, and I happened to come upon a documentary titled Vito, spelled V-I-T-O. The description mentions something about this person being associated with the gay rights movement, so I decided to tape it for my wife, and then I decided to watch it. As I started watching it, I came to an uneasy conclusion. There were historical events in my own lifetime that I didn't have a full picture of. Sure, I had lived through them, but because I wasn't old enough to understand what was going on, due to the ruralness of where I grew up, it hadn't really affected me. And I'm talking about AIDS and HIV and that sort of thing. So I stand before you today to tell you of the lessons that I had to learn all over again for the first time. I will start by saying I was a child of the 80s. Yes, the decade that brought you Reaganomics, hair bands, and shoulder pads for women. This was the decade of my adolescence. For much of that decade, my concerns were about playing baseball, getting my homework done on time, and impressing my classmates of my knowledge of current events. To keep up on said current events, I would watch the evening news every night with my siblings and with my father. And one of the primary memories of that time in my life was that as we would watch the nightly news, whenever the name Reagan or whenever he would say something, my dad would start yelling at the TV and shaking his fist at it. So by the time I started high school in the fall of 1987, the AIDS epidemic had become a ubiquitous subject that was seemingly everywhere. AIDS, even though my classmates and I didn't know much about it, it became the ever-present boogeyman in our lives. Now, do any of you remember this? What was worse than having this boogeyman hanging around was the misinformation that was spread at the time, from thinking you could catch it from kissing someone or sitting on a toilet seat. There we go. I would also see protests of sick people on the news and wonder what they were so upset about. Growing up in Eastern Maine, I had a sense that anything awful would stay away because everything was so far away. The first time AIDS became kind of a real thing to me was when I learned who Ryan White was. Now, as a reminder, Ryan White was a hemophiliac who contracted HIV through a tainted blood transfusion. And once it became known he had acquired HIV this way, his hometown was Kokomo, Indiana. They literally wanted to run him and his family out of town. Kokomo is about 2 hours south of where my home in Elkhart is located. And it upset me to see how he was treated, but that's about as far as my understanding went. And I want to say here as an aside, in the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, they have on permanent display a display of his bedroom. So that way you can visit it and ask questions about it, but at the same time, it kind of galls me that he's more accepted in death than he was in life. Had he lived, tomorrow would have been his 50th birthday. Flash forward 25 years, and where I'm sitting in my living room and watching this HBO documentary titled Vito, and it's, again, V-I-T-O. And the person who is the subject of this documentary, his name was Vito Russell, and he was one of the early leaders in the gay rights movement. He was involved in the organization of the Gay Activists Alliance, which was active mostly in the early to mid 1970s in New York City. And one of the many protests they did, this organization, was that they tried to take out marriage licenses in June of 1971. So he and the people in this organization were ahead of their time. He is probably best known for writing the book called The Celluloid Closet, which detailed the subject of how homosexuality has been portrayed in Hollywood from the beginning of the recorded entertainment industry. As the AIDS epidemic grew, Vito became involved with the group ACT UP. ACT UP was established in March of 1987 due to the inaction of the American health system and to the spread of the AIDS virus. Now, the protest style of ACT UP was one of direct action, where they would organize quickly and loudly. Now, as a teenager, I would watch these things on TV at night and say to myself, why are they being so loud? Don't they know they're offending people? What's the big deal? So here's what I didn't know at the time. From 1980 to 1989, 27,408 people had died of AIDS in the United States, and until ACT UP started protesting on a wider scale, AIDS was largely ignored by the political establishment. The reason for this ignorance was the fact that the people at that time who were most affected by AIDS were gay men and intravenous drug users. People like Vito Russell and the late Larry Kramer, one of the co-creators of ACT UP, started these protests because prejudice was literally killing people. An example of that, of course, is Ronald Reagan, who was president during the entire time of the AIDS crisis. And it lasted through his 8 years in office, but he didn't actually mention the word AIDS until October of 1987, 7 years after it started. In an excerpt from a book called The Truth About Reagan and AIDS by Michael Bronski, he states that, and these are his words, most importantly, AIDS research was chronically underfunded. When doctors for the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health asked for more funding for their work on AIDS, they were routinely denied it. Between June of 1981 and May of 1982, the CDC spent less than $1 million on AIDS and $9 million on Legionnaire's disease. And at that point, more than 1,000 of the 2,000 reported AIDS cases resulted in death. There were fewer than 50 deaths due to Legionnaire's disease. This drastic lack of funding would continue through the Reagan years. When health and support groups in the gay community were beginning to initiate education and prevention programs, they were denied federal funding. In October of 1987, Senator Jesse Helms, you remember that guy? Amended federal appropriations bill to prohibit AIDS education efforts that, quote, encourage and promote homosexual activity. That is, efforts that tell gay men how to have safe sex. Yes, it is a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? And I almost wanted to say, interesting how a right-wing government will deny what's going on with a virus that's killing large swaths of people. It kind of saddens me how little we've learned in 40 years. So around the same time that I was watching this documentary on Vito Russell, I also read a novel from John Irving called In One Person. Many of Irving's characters that he writes about are people that he calls sexual suspects because they are not heteronormative. The story follows William Abbott, a bisexual man from his adolescence in the early 1960s up until the present. Irving's main character lives through the AIDS crisis and discusses in details how many of his friends didn't. And his character says this in the book: if your passage through the Reagan years was unclouded by watching someone you know die of AIDS, then you don't remember those years or Ronald Reagan the way I do. Some decades slip by, others drag on. What made the 80s last forever was that my friends and lovers kept dying into the 90s and beyond. By 95, in New York alone, more Americans had died of AIDS than were killed in Vietnam. From 1993 to 1995, the death rate from AIDS peaked at around 50,000 a year. And again, when I originally wrote this a few years ago, the idea of 50,000 people dying due to a specific illness blew my mind, and it seemed inconceivable. As of today, 777,000 Americans have died due to COVID. What frightens me at times is the callousness of which both of these numbers are met with. I'm afraid that we have become numb to what is going on around us. While the worst of the AIDS crisis in the United States has receded, in other parts of the world, the battle is still going on, mostly from people living in poorer countries who can't afford the medications or the treatments. And there is still a stigma attached to people who have it, the stigma is that they're engaging in perceived immoral behavior. Because in many nations, homosexuality is illegal, and so is birth control. Condom usage and safer sex techniques are not allowed to be taught, which would stem the flow of AIDS among gay men and the women they are married to. Institutional sexual assault also causes the spread of AIDS in some of these nations as well. So unfortunately, people are still dying because of this, an estimated 14,000 a year, give or take. And as alluded to by the John Irving quote, an estimated 583,000 people have died due to AIDS. But there is good news. There is some good news. As I mentioned before, due to the improvements of treatment, some patients who have been on these medications for long periods of time describe their HIV as being in remission. In fact, a couple of close friends of mine once told me that they have lived longer with HIV than they did without it. Of course, there is still no cure. It's not the all-encompassing boogeyman it used to be. And I bet that you all can think of someone you know who is living with HIV. Like many prophets, Vito Russell and millions like him didn't live long enough to see these medications and treatments come to fruition. Vito Russell died in 1990 due to AIDS-related complications. Due to Vito's agitation and leadership of countless others, many are alive today that might not have been. And AIDS has become something to live with, no longer a predestined death sentence. And the work he and countless others did helped speed up the process of government approval of new medications and new vaccines, which have benefited us all in the age of COVID. So in contemplating in what this history means to me, I find myself wishing I could go back in time and tell my teenage self what was really going on. I wish I could tell him why there was marching in the streets and why there was a need for groups of people to do whatever it took to get attention, even if it meant occupying the FDA building in Washington, D.C., even if it meant taking over the New York Stock Exchange and storming St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. The main reason is being that people were literally fighting for their lives. Since I can't go back, I will take what I've learned and pay it forward like any good history teacher should. It's been said that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We remember the Holocaust of World War II to bear witness to those who needlessly suffered and died. On this World AIDS Day, we need to do the same, even if when the day comes that a cure is found, to honor those who are no longer among us. Our closing hymn today is number 121, We'll Build the Land.
Oh
chalice extinguishing today is from Cheryl Block, and she says, as we go forward into this frightening, exhilarating, confusing, miraculous world, may we offer our comfort to the afflicted, our love to those who are lonely, and our wish for all to be safe. Now, ordinarily, I would just let it go into the postlude, but today, at the suggestion of your brilliant and dedicated music people who serve you all here at Northwest, came up with the idea of performing this song called How Long by Pepper Choplin. And to let you all know, yes, we have people here who are going to sing in the sanctuary, but they are all masked, and we are distanced, and there's nobody else here. So I'd like to throw it to members of our choir to postlude us out.